Hello and welcome to the lecture on small business management. In this lecture, I'll talk about the process of managing a small business and how that's different from entrepreneurship, what we just talked about. I'll talk about the use of consultants, some of the benefits of being in a small business. I'll talk about some resources for small business, and then lastly, I'll talk about trends in small business. So some of the benefits of owning a small business, and I would contrast this with entrepreneurship. A lot of people conflate the two terms. So entrepreneurship is somebody that takes a risk in trying to change something. Okay, so Elon Musk, even though that's not a small business, you'd certainly agree that he's an entrepreneur. So is Mark Cuban and a variety of different people that could be in very big businesses, but they're disruptive. They're trying to make change, that sort of thing. On the other hand, you can own a mom and pop restaurant, not necessarily be trying to change anything. You're running a small business. You're not necessarily an entrepreneur. That's how I define the two. So some of the benefits of owning a small business, one is independence and a better lifestyle. Combining travel with work, those kinds of things can be a definite benefit. You can get personal satisfaction from your work. I know a lot of times people are frustrated working for somebody else or feeling that they're putting in all the effort and somebody else is reaping the reward, or they feel that their ideas aren't being listened to, and that this can be a contrast to that. There are generally better opportunities for women and minorities compared to large organizations that tend to kind of perpetuate the mix that they have. There's greater adaptability, so you can think of big businesses as kind of an oil tanker where it takes miles and miles to be able to turn an oil tanker. Small businesses can be very nimble. So when the market changes, when COVID hits as an example, and all of a sudden people need things that they didn't need before, small businesses can pivot and meet those needs much more quickly than large companies can. And then the ability to serve specialized markets. That was one of the things that I enjoyed in my business, which is you could go after a small niche of customers and make business sense for you, where big companies might not want to mess with small markets. Some of the challenges of owning a small business: most small business owners have limited management skills. They ended up with a small business because they're a good cook, or they're a seamstress, or they're an artist, or whatever the case is, but they're good at making cupcakes. They have some skill that leads them to start a business. Well, that skill isn't necessarily strategic planning and human resource management and accounting and finance and all of the things that you also need. Running a business can take you away from the activities you're passionate about. So say you're passionate about cooking and you open a restaurant, and in that restaurant you do all of the cooking and you're really fulfilled, but people encourage you to open new restaurants and expand, and pretty soon you have 10 restaurants and all you're doing is running around hiring people and managing operations, and you never get to cook, that sort of thing. It can be difficult for small businesses to obtain financing, meaning bank loans or investors. Those are generally the two sources of money aside from the founder, him or herself, to get financing. So either you borrow from a bank or you talk other people into investing in your company. It can also be a challenge to comply with all of the different laws that might impact your particular business, especially as you grow beyond your local town or your local community. It's one thing to have a business in Olympia and understand the laws in Olympia and the laws in the state of Washington that apply to you. Well, if you do business in 3 or 4 different states, knowing all of those different laws and complying with them is tough to do. Sometimes businesses decide to stay small for that particular reason. They don't want to become experts in human resource law across the country, that sort of thing. And keep in mind, you've probably heard this before, ignorance is no defense. So if you don't comply with a law, the fact that you weren't aware of it doesn't mean you're excused. So one important thing about small business management is the team that you put together to help you run it. You're generally not going to be able to do everything yourself. You're going to need other people in your organization to complement your skills. And one book that I do recommend is the book Good to Great. So the authors looked at a lot of different businesses that were in the same industry. I think they looked at CVS and Walgreens, if I'm not mistaken. been a little while since I've read it. And they looked at one of those companies succeeded and the other didn't. And what was the difference between the two companies? What's kind of the commonality among all of those examples? And what they found is that having the right people on the bus is what the author talked about. So having the right people in your company, and in right people meaning the people with the right attitude, the right approach, the ability to learn and adapt and grow with the company and kind of rise to meet new challenges and that sort of thing. Those are the right people versus people that are not like that. That's the biggest difference. So in terms of hiring people, that was the thing, and we'll talk about human resource management later in the course, but that was the thing that I found most difficult about owning a business. It's easy to figure out how to make things and how to sell them and that sort of thing, but dealing with human beings and getting people to be motivated and pull in the same direction and all of that kind of thing is the toughest thing. So some of the questions to ask yourself when you're looking at who you want to bring into your company, one is, do they possess the necessary skills? So do they possess skills that you don't have? Do they complement you? Next, do they have a record of success? So have they done what they say they can do in other scenarios, in other companies, other organizations? That's not to say that they haven't made mistakes or have had failures. A lot of times that can be very valuable given that they've learned from those failures. So have they had business setbacks that have given them insight into how they would do things differently in the future? That's a sign of somebody being willing to adapt. The key thing is, will their personality make them fit in with the team? And that can be a really tough thing to judge from an interview. Sometimes doing group interviews can be helpful in that way because other people can give you their perspectives on the person as well. But fit is important. Can they manage others effectively? Just because they know how to sell doesn't mean they know how to be a sales manager. So have they learned that skill somewhere? Do they have prior experience or education in that sort of thing? And then it's really important, underline this, that they complement your skills. It's easy to go looking for a clone of yourself because you're so awesome, but in reality, you want people that are different than you. So one way to depict an organization is through an organizational chart. This was the organizational chart for my company right before I sold it at the end of 2010. And it shows you can do these in different ways. This one is done based on functions, so different department managers that all report directly to me, and then the people that report to them. So this is a good way to kind of communicate that to other people. So some of the benefits of working for a small business as opposed to owning one is, it used to be that you worked for a big company because that gave you stability. You went to work for Kodak or General Electric or Pepsi or some huge company knowing that you could continue to work there as long as you didn't do something really stupid until you retired. And that's really changed. That advantage doesn't exist any longer for large businesses. They adapt and change their companies and let go of employees just like small businesses do. So there isn't that advantage there any longer. A lot of people find it a more comfortable environment. It's a bit more and more flexibility for work-life balance. So if you work for a small company, they're likely to understand if you've been there for a little while and they've gotten to know you that you need to take off on Thursday afternoon because your daughter has a play at school or something like that. Whereas if you work for Boeing, that may not be as easy. So there's more give and take in terms of how it is to work there. A lot of times employees find that there's a greater opportunity to make an impact in a small business. So I had a friend of mine, somebody that I hired that had worked for Microsoft and then came to work for my company. And he was saying at Microsoft, he could go to work and he could hit an absolute home run every day. He could just do an amazing, fantastic job, and it really wouldn't move the needle very much at all for the whole organization. So in big companies like that, it can be hard to feel like you're making a difference. So for people where it's important to them, the way they're wired to make a difference in their job through their work, then a small company might be a better fit. And then last, there's potential for profit sharing or partial ownership or those kinds of things as well. So the use of consultants, a lot of times it can make sense to use consultants if you have a short-term need and you don't really need to hire somebody to do that every single day. Maybe you need servers set up and some IT functions established. It can work to hire somebody that can do that and then be on call if you have problems versus having a full-time IT person on staff. So there's advantages to doing that. Some of the disadvantages is you have to keep in mind that the consultant's business plan is to get more of your money. It's in their interest to have you need them more and hire them more and pay them more. So you have to kind of always be a little bit wary when they suggest I could do this, I could do that. Well, of course, they can do all those things. A lot of times people will use management consultants to help them with the organizational structure and those types of things, sometimes help in hiring people. It can help to have an outsider. Every single business, no matter how big, should have a tax accountant and they should have a business attorney. There's lots of different kinds of accountants. Not all of them are tax accountants. And there's a lot of different kinds of attorneys. Not all of them are business attorneys. But you need somebody that can draw contracts up for you, that can give you advice if you have conflicts with others, that sort of thing. And of course, with a tax accountant, you need somebody that understands the tax code and make sure that you make decisions that benefit your business. Some companies will use marketing consultants. That can be somebody that can understand search engine optimization, some things we'll talk about when we talk about marketing. I have used designers on a contract basis in the past to design logos and things like that. I mentioned technology specialist earlier. And one important, I wouldn't necessarily call them consultants for sure, but one thing that's a really good idea to do is to have a group of outsiders that you can meet with. If it's very formal, they can be a board of directors. In that situation, they have some legal liability, so some people aren't willing to be a board of directors and they could technically fire you. A lot of smaller companies will use an advisory committee. So it's a group of people that are maybe retired or near the end of their career, and they're interested in helping small businesses. And they can be kind of a sounding board. I mentioned earlier that being an owner of a small company can be pretty lonely. There aren't people you can talk to really about what's going on. Well, an advisory committee, a group of 3 or 4 people that meets once every couple of months in the evening, can be somebody that you can bounce things off of and get advice from. So that's a positive thing. You can also get the benefit of their contacts and those sorts of things. So it works well for both, and it generally doesn't cost very much money. So management style, it's important that companies have very clear policies. I think the majority of employees want to comply with the policies, and there can be problems when they don't understand the policies. So making sure that how you expect people to behave is clearly laid out in writing. Management style communication, make sure you let employees know what's going on in the company. It's really easy to sit back and think that people know what you know, and if somebody's out there driving a forklift in the warehouse, they really don't necessarily know what your thoughts are about expansion or about those types of things. So err on the side of communicating more with people rather than less. Employee recognition. I think it can really be easy, especially in a small business that's growing, to always, everything is a fire drill. You're always running around trying to solve problems and that sort of thing. And stopping and recognizing somebody that's done a good job can often take a back seat or get overlooked. And it's really important not to do that, to take the time to recognize employees. One of the things that I like to do in my old company is do something for somebody that they might not do for themselves. So somebody in the warehouse that does a really good job getting an order out on time, really kind of goes the extra mile. I'd give them a gift card to a fancy restaurant for $100 or $150 so they could take their spouse out for a nice dinner and dessert and everything. That's something they didn't expect, but it doesn't cost much money, but it shows that you've recognized what they've done and you appreciate it. That can go a long way. An employee's ability to affect change, that's how do you allow that? Of course, you can't go too far in that direction. Moderation is needed, but that's an important part of how you might run your company. And then fairness. How do you treat people? How do you expect people to treat each other? So the last thing I want to talk about is resources for small businesses. So there's a couple of different things. The Small Business Administration is a department within the federal government, within the Department of Commerce. They do not directly loan money to companies. They might have some very small micro loans that they do, but for the most part, they guarantee loans that banks will make. So some banks are authorized to do small business lending. Columbia Bank is an example of a local bank that does that. And so you go through the process with your banker. The banker relays that information to the Small Business Administration. If it meets their criteria, they'll guarantee the loan so that the bank doesn't have risk. You can often get a much lower interest rate because the bank doesn't, again, have the risk involved with that. So that's it's something the federal government does to support small business. So it's important to think about that. Many states have small business investment companies. These are not-for-profit entities that receive funding that they in turn use to generate local economic activity. SCORE, the Service Corps of Retired Executives, is a group of people. I mentioned advisory committees earlier. These are executives that want to give advice to new businesses, and they have a vast experience, so they can share that. There's assistance for women and minority-owned businesses, and one place that you can get access to all of this information is the Thurston County Economic Council. They're in Lacey on 6th Avenue, and they are a quasi-government entity supported by government funding and donations, and their whole gig is trying to create business opportunities in Thurston County, helping businesses, and their services are free. So thank you very much. I look forward to talking to you with the next lecture.